Have you ever imagined sitting at the table of a rich Roman patricio and proving the most luxurious dishes in the antiquity? Forget the bread and oil of the commoners, the true Roman aristocrats made worthy banquets of gods, with so exotic delicacies that some seem absurd today. Did you know that in ancient Rome the nobles paid fortunes to eat roasted flamingos, eels fed with human flesh and peacock tongue pathetic? Or that there was an exclusive space where they were going to vomit and keep eating? What the rich ate at that time was not just food, was a symbol of status, power and extravagance, and some of these food choices may seem shocking to us today. And at the end of this video, I'll tell you what the luxurious dessert was in ancient Rome and why only the most powerful could prove it. But before, you've left your like, because that helps the channel a lot. And tell me here in the comments, what's the most exotic dish you've ever eaten? Does it come near the Roman banquets? Now, prepare for a gastronomical trip to the past. The Roman banquet, much beyond the bread and azite. If for Roman commoners the day-by-day revolved around bread, oil and water, for the elite the reality was completely different. The meals of the rich weren't just feeding moments, but true social events and status demonstrations. The banquets were called livered, and they happened in luxurious rooms, often decorated with marble, mosaics and statues. Imagine a salon where guests didn't sit, but they reclined on couches, being served by slaves with gold and silver trays. Eat with silverware? Forget it. The Romans used their hands and, at most, spoons for the liquids. And you know that modern rule of not talking with a mouth full? For the rich Romans, the conversation during dinner was mandatory. In fact, hosts hired even philosophers and poets to entertain guests with stories and debates about politics, art and mythology. The elite banquets could last for hours, or even days. The more extravagant, the better. The idea was to flaunt wealth not only with food, but with the act of excess eating itself. And to continue this gastronomical orgy, they used a peculiar trick. In the next chapter, let's see the exotic and rare ingredients that were part of these meals, and some will surprise you. Exotic and rares, the food-like status. Social. In ancient Rome, food was much more than a necessity, was a symbol of power. The rarer and exotic it was an ingredient, the greater the prestige of who served it. And rich Romans didn't spare effort to impress their guests. Some of these food came from faraway lands and were extremely expensive. For example, the garum, a fermented fish sauce, was a true fever in the Roman elite. Made with fish viscera left in the sun for weeks, he had a strong smell, but it was considered a luxury ingredient. Now, imagine serving flamingo languages or even roasted paradise birds at your dinner. Well, for the richest Romans, these were common delicacies. The Seneca philosopher even criticized this obsession, saying that the Roman elite had more pity for a simple meal than a mistreated slave. And speaking of excesses, there was a particular meat that was highly valued among the most wicked Romans: eels fed with human flesh. That's right. Some senators created eels in tanks and fed them dead slaves to improve the fish's flavor. But if you found this bizarre, wait until you meet the strangest dishes the Roman nobility served in their banquets. In the next chapter, we'll explore the most peculiar and shocking recipes of ancient Rome. The nobility's most peculiar dishes. Today we find strange eating insects or exotic meat. Rich Romans led extravagance to a completely different level. For them, the more unusual the dish, the more prestigious he brought. One of the most bizarre dishes was the peacock tongue pâté. To prepare it, dozens of peacocks were slaughtered, their languages removed and transformed into a temperate folder with honey and rare spices. Besides being extremely expensive, this dish was seen as a symbol of sophistication. Another famous dish was the roasted more, often fed with human flesh before it was sacrificed, as we mentioned before. The Romans believed that made the meat more noble. And if you think flambetas are a modern invention, you're wrong. One of the luxuries of the time was the stuffed pig, where the animal was opened and stuffed with living birds, boiled eggs and exotic spices. He was then roasted whole and, when he was cut in front of the guests, the living birds flew out, creating an impressive show. But the apex of extravagance was on a dish known as Tertus roast, where little roasted birds were stuffed with oysters and roasted in slow fire. The Romans believed that this combination mixed the sabors of heaven and sea, and all of that, of course, was watered to a lot of wine, but not the way we drink today. In the next chapter, we will explore the role of drinks in the Roman banquets and the most curious customs of this tradition. The wine and the drinks on Roman elite. If there's anything that never lacked in the Roman elite banquets, it was wine. But forget the idea of drinking a good pure red, the Romans had very peculiar customs when it was about that drink. First, wine was never consumed pure. He was always mixed with water, because drinking wine without dilution was considered a custom of barbarians. The host decided the proportion between wine and water, controlling the rhythm of the guests' drunkenness. And don't think the wine was only meant to accompany the food. The Romans loved to create unusual mixes, like wine with honey, or aromatic herbs, or even with pine resin, which gave a rather strong flavor to drink. In the banquets, a specialized slave called the pincerna was responsible for serving the wine and making sure no one stays with the empty cup. But there was a curious detail: drinking without following the rules of the host was considered a great offense. And speaking of rules, there was a mandatory ritual at nobility dinners, the gods. Before drinking, the guests had to spill some of the wine on the floor or at an altar as offering. This symbolized respect and gratitude to the gods. But the most controversial tradition was the famous vomitorium. A lot of people believe this was a place where the Romans were gonna vomit to keep eating, but that's a myth. The word vomitorium actually referred to rapid amphitheaters exits. However, there are reports that some rich Romans actually induced vomit to keep eating, which only reinforces the level of exaggeration of these banquets. And after all that food and drink, it was time for dessert. In the next chapter, we'll explore the sweet extravagances of the Roman elite and the curious habits of the banquet ending. The end of banquet, desserts and curious costumes. After hours, or even days, of banquet, rich Romans finalized the meal with luxurious desserts. But unlike what we're used to today, the sweets of ancient Rome didn't carry sugar. After all, he wasn't known in Europe. In his place, honey, dates and dry fruit were the main sweeteners. One of the most coveted desserts was the domestic dulcia, a sort of tamara stuffed with nuts and covered with honey. The sweet was so appreciated that it was referred to in writing of the famous Roman gastronomer Apicius, that left one of the first cookbooks in history. Another typical dessert was the globuli, fried cupcakes made with cheese and flour, dipped in honey. Yes, the Romans already had their own version of sweet fried over 2,000 years ago. But for the richest, nothing overcome the most extravagant dessert of all, the Ambrosius libus, a sweet made of dumb milk and smelled of rose petals. They say Cleopatra, Julius Caesar's lover, and Marco Antonio, took dumb milk baths, because he believed that it made his skin younger. So nothing more suitable than turning this ingredient into a dish worthy of the elite. And to end the night, the guests didn't just go home. It was common for the host to distribute presents of the banquet participants, from perfumes and jewels to slaves, to the most privileged. The rich Romans saw food as a show, and their dinners were marked for luxury, exaggerations and often strange habits. Now, tell me, which one of these delicacies would you have the courage to prove? Leave your comment and don't forget to enjoy and share this video. The food of the Roman elite was a direct reflection of its society: ostentation, power and excess. Eating wasn't just a need, but a social show, a way to demonstrate wealth and status. From endless banquets to extravagant dishes, the rich Romans were delighted with delicacies that today would be unthinkable. Baked flamingos, peacock languages, fed eels with human flesh, those were just some of the bizarre choices of Roman society. But deep down, despite all these eccentricities, the essence of Roman food teaches us something important: food has always been connected to power and culture. If today we have superalities, restrictive diets and luxurious restaurants, Romans already did something similar, just in a much more exaggerated way. Now I want to know, which of these food would you have the courage to prove? Or did any of them make you lose your appetite? Comment down here. And if you liked that video, don't forget to enjoy it, share it and sign up for the canal. This helps bring more contents like this to you. See you in the next video.